Hello and welcome to Undercommon Taste. This is a podcast where we create and discuss homebrew content for tabletop RPGs.
Beyond here, there be dragons.
I'm Ian Woodworth. I'm joined by my co-host James Daly, and today we are not joined by Clark Rowenson. We had some scheduling issues come up on our end, and we weren't able to make a reschedule work before this episode would come out, so he's going to be in next episode instead.
Yeah, Eris definitely had an influence on this week.
You need to look at renewing your extended warranty, James, because your parts keep breaking.
Hey, you know what? I went 2 years without going to the hospital. I call that a solid win. I'm rocking an easy con score of 8, okay?
Yeah, fair enough. So anyway, this ended up being a little bit more impromptu than I had intended, but this was an episode I had planned on us doing later on after we had finished talking about the D&D dragons, the various types. But I don't see any reason why we can't do it today. So we're going to be talking about dragons in non-D&D media, different portrayals of dragons that we particularly like, and a little bit on how to perhaps adapt the dragons that you're using in your game to move away from that traditional D&D color chart typing of dragons.
Yeah, I like that. And then, too, again, as we try to move more system agnostic so we can incorporate more systems with our games and playstyles, this is a good way to do it as well. And even if you're still playing, a homebrew D&D or whatever, and you want to change your dragons up a bit, there's no reason why you can't do that. And I mean, as a DM, as a world builder, you do have that option. And borrowing from literature, borrowing from TV and movies is a perfectly acceptable way to do that.
Right, yeah. And there are just so many different and interesting portrayals of dragons in media. And there are almost as many different portrayals of dragons as there are writers who are creating the media.
Absolutely.
And so it's nice to sort of tap into some of these other ideas just to really shake things up.
Right. So let's go ahead and dive in. And what is your first example that comes to mind?
Well, I think the first example that comes to mind is World of Warcraft.
Okay.
Honestly, it is the most ubiquitous pop culture dragon media outside of D&D, at least in my opinion.
No, I mean, Blizzard, they only have like several million, active subscriptions. And yeah, no, Blizzard has been around forever. And they have built a surprising amount of dragon lore, which, for all the things that Blizzard does that I hate, especially early on, they were amazing lore builders. And just the amount of storytelling in their games used to be phenomenal. And that's flagged a bit over the years. Thank you, Activision, Microsoft. But even still, they do quite a bit to build on this lore.
Right. To the point where the last expansion was built entirely around the Dragonflights.
Oh, nice.
It was called Dragonflight.
Yeah.
And, you went back to the Dragon Isles and you did a whole bunch of stuff. And, the main villain, at least at the beginning, was this elemental infused proto-drake.
Nice.
And, the dragons of World of Warcraft permeate the game.
Yeah.
I don't think that there is a single expansion that hasn't had dragons playing at least a major supporting role in the storyline.
I'm going back and I'm thinking Burning Crusade was a little light on dragons.
It was, if you don't include the dungeons and you don't include the endgame content.
Okay.
Because BC had the Nether Drakes and it had the Infinite Dragonflight.
They did. I forgot. I always lumped the Nether Drakes into Wrath. But yeah, so you are correct. So yes. With this, how would you say the Blizzard dragons differ most from the D&D dragons?
Well, for starters, 4 of the 5 major dragonflights are chromatic dragons that aren't evil.
Fair, yeah.
Necessarily. The blacks are a bit iffy, but they weren't entirely in control of themselves.
Yeah.
They ended up adding that in a little bit later on as a qualifier
Right.
but they were corrupted by the old gods, and so they weren't fully in control of their own agenda.
Yeah, I like that. And so, like, my experience with the Blizzard Dragons is, yeah, I agree, is one, they are still divided by color. I don't recall too many or any metallic dragons, so they're all, some form of chromatic
Bronze.
or bronze. Yes, you are correct. The bronze dragons, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
But even still, the dragons themselves, since they are sentient, they are not all lumped into, here's an evil monstrous race, here's, a good monstrous race or whatever. So each individual has agency and can make their own choice, which I think is great. More so in Blizzard Dragons that I really enjoy than in D&D is, as you said, the dragons are so interworked with the lore. They're not a creator race, but they're like that next generation down. Like if you looked at Tolkien and you've got, oh God, you've got the Star Children, I forget what they're called. And then you had like the next generation down that made the elves, it's kind of like that. And so while the dragons themselves are not deific, they're not gods, they're just about the next best thing as much as they manipulate and change aspects like time and physical force and nations and things like this.
Right. And the Dragonflight expansion did go a bit into the background of that on how the aspects, the leaders of these 5 Dragonflights were basically uplifted by the Titans, these sort of godlike entities. They are the opposition to the old gods within the setting, and they came in and they uplifted, I guess uplifted would be the proper term. They upgraded, basically,
Okay.
because all 5 of the original aspects started life as proto-dragons. They all hatched as proto-dragons, and then whenever the Titans reworked them, they took on this new dragon form, and all of their offspring following after that took that form as well.
Okay.
And it plays into part of the main tension in the storyline, because these proto-drakes that ended up not falling in with the Titans, that ended up embracing the elemental chaos, they did that from a sense of they didn't want to have their destiny determined by someone else.
Okay. No, I totally respect that. And again, that kind of still leads into, even though you have these large generalized group of draconic creatures or dragons themselves, they can still make individual choices, so they're not all cookie cutters of each other. Which, again, going back, even when you go back to D&D, you're supposed to have these huge magical sentient creatures, but they're very bestial in the, okay, here's a dragon, it's a monster, it's going to attack you no matter what because it's red or it's black or it's green, which I really dislike. Again, going back into here now, another similarity though between the Blizzard Dragons and D&D is these are long-lived, ancient, powerful, both physically and magically as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, just a little brief breakdown of the different dragonflights. The first one you have are the Reds. The aspect of the Red Dragonflight, Alexstrasza, is considered the Queen of Dragons. She is the leader figure of all of the dragonflights, not just the Reds. And they have this connection to the magic of life and death, primarily purification of unnatural disease and death magic.
Yeah. So if you're going to like try to build in like one of this type of red dragon into your game, they would be very opposed to anything like necromancy. Again, things like that, they're going to stand strongly against it.
Absolutely. And, I would even go so far as to change their breath weapon type from fire to radiant.
Okay, that would make perfect sense.
And, give them some advantage, have their breath weapon deal extra damage to undead, perhaps.
Yeah.
Things like that. Have them where they can cast lesser restoration at will once they get to a certain age. And, as you can see in certain parts of the storyline throughout World of Warcraft's history, which gate is it? The Wrath Gate? Battle at the Wrath Gate from Wrath of Lich King?
Okay.
The one where the Forsaken
Yes.
drop the
Yeah.
plague on everybody.
Yeah. God, I was so happy with that cutscene. That made me so happy. That was something
That
they've
was
been building up since Vanilla.
Yeah, that was such a powerful scene.
Yeah, it was.
But at the end of that particular scene, the red dragons come in and they burn away the plague with their
Right.
breath. And so I would say to a point that, they would be able to modulate their breath even to where they could heal living creatures while damaging undead creatures at the same time with their breath weapon. So they could like breathe their cone of breath weapon into this group and it
Right.
heals their allies while damaging their enemies.
Right. So stepping back for those that might not be familiar with old Blizzard lore, stepping back into Warcraft 3, which World of Warcraft takes place after, a bunch of necromancers plagued a bunch of grain, and this plague created undead. Going through various things, the undead was controlled by the Lich King. A branch of them were able to break away, but they still wanted to create more undead because they couldn't reproduce on their own, and they wanted their culture and whatever to survive. And so at this Wrathgate, they are at the gates of the Lich King. They have armies from all sides there gathered, and they have finally perfected this new toxin and think basically a miasma or a cloud that turns you into a zombie. And they just unleash it on friend and foe alike. They just dump it everywhere. And because this was such a huge shift in the natural order, the Red Dragonflight did come in and take steps to rectify.
Right. So the next group are the Greens. They are very druidic in their field. Their magic is very much aligned with the druids within the setting. And their charge is the defense of the Emerald Dream, which is basically the Warcraft equivalent of the Feywild.
Yeah.
And they have the ability to fall asleep and project their consciousness into the Emerald Dream. And then there are story elements where agents of the Burning Legion have gotten into the Emerald Dream and are corrupting it into the Emerald Nightmare. And that whole thing comes to a head in the Legion expansion, which I think is what, the sixth expansion?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. And so, yeah, with these, again, these are going to be more of your quote-quote neutral dragons, though in Blizzard, they definitely would tilt more towards the good. But I think if we were going to bring one of these to your game, be it D&D or Powered by the Apocalypse, or even like Kids on Bikes or something like that, these dragons would be found in like forested areas, jungle areas with a lot of vibrant natural growth. And one thing I would absolutely give them would be an at-will plane shift. So they can step into the ethereal plane or the Feywild or the Never Never, if you want to use, a butcher term, whatever that plane of existence that's just off of ours, so they can affect things there and come back and check. If you're a fan of Stranger Things, they'd be able to step into the Upside Down.
Yeah, and this would be an excellent addition to your game if you wanted to bring back the older edition element of the Plane of Dreams.
Yes.
And so these are the custodians of the Plane of Dreams. They are how you are able to get into the Plane of Dreams. If you, for some reason, needed to get into the Plane of Dreams, you would have to contact one of these green dragons, and they would basically act as your guide within the Plane of Dreams to make sure that you didn't get lost and that you were able to get back out.
I have not seen one in a long time, but this would be perfect for something like even a Wheel of Time themed game.
I could see that. Yeah,
this would be your guide into the dream. Was it the dream? It's not the dream world. I forget what they call it in that.
Yeah, it's been forever since I've finished those books.
Right, but yeah, with there they have a very active where you can go and you step into the dreams, and again, you can travel, you can communicate, you can do certain things in the dreamscape that you can't necessarily do physically. And again, this would be a great way to guide your characters in through that.
Yeah, and you also have what is the just a second, I got it.
It's right there.
Brandon Sanderson.
Mistborn?
No, I am drawing a complete blank on the big series. Yeah, Stormlight Archive. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I've not started into Stormlight yet.
But yeah, there are entities called the Sprin, which are kind of like spirit creatures that take on different aspects, and they have basically a mirror world that they are able to go into, and in later books it becomes a pretty substantial plot point that a limited number of people are able to make that shift themselves into this other plane of existence.
Nice.
So yeah, that would be sort of the same vibe that you would get with what these green dragons would be able to do.
Okay, I like that.
So the next up are the blue dragons. I really
the blues
like.
are probably my favorite. Yeah, the Blizzard
Yeah,
blues are great.
I think the bronze are still my favorite in Warcraft,
Okay.
but the blues are real close.
Yeah.
So the blues are the guardians of the ley lines. They're the masters of the arcane. They tend to these locations, these hotspots of magical energy, and protect them and harness that power for arcane magical purposes.
Yeah, these are the keepers of magic. These are going to be your sages. So again, if you're trying to bring these blues into the game, they are going to be like your archmages and things like that, or even like the people that the archmages whisper about. These are absolute fonts of power.
Yeah, these are the people that the archmages go to when they need help.
Right. Now, something I talked to Ian about and I'd like to get to at some point is sources of magic. And I've seen, I wish I could remember the creator's name. But he was talking about even some of the magic lore in D&D and talking about like the time of troubles and things like that, where you have the quote, quote, the weave of magic within D&D and how it gets disrupted from time to time. This is what those dragons would be there to do or to protect, depending on their given whim. Now, again, even within Blizzard, you do get some of these blue dragons that become kind of power hungry and they want all the magic because it's theirs and everything else is just not worthy of it in their opinion. And that could be a thing too, is something trying to disrupt whatever magic system you have in your game, you know, whatever system you've got. And if something can switch that magic on or off like a switch, that would very likely be one of these blue dragons.
Right. And we see that in Wrath of the Lich King with what Malagos is doing with the Nexus.
Right.
Is less of a power hungry move and more of a iRobot. I'm protecting humanity by removing humanity as a problem.
Right, yes.
And there were some extenuating circumstances as well in all of that. Malagos was, as was revealed later on, I guess retconned in maybe, not entirely under his own auspices while he was acting in that particular time.
Right. And again, going back to a big difference between D&D dragons and other dragons. In D&D, once you start getting to like ancient worms, these dragons are near invulnerable, where something like a Blizzard dragon or in other media, these dragons are still, it takes a lot. I mean, it's not something your average Joe's going to do, or even your average party of level 10s, but they are still vulnerable to things like manipulation, or they can have the wool pulled over their eyes, or they can be outclassed or outsmarted on occasion.
Right, yeah. And, you know, you see that several times throughout the more recent expansions where Caligos, who is now become the new aspect of the Blue Dragon Flight, where he's just so intelligent that the simple things elude him.
Oh, I love that kind of character.
And so things will end up happening that he didn't plan on. He didn't, you know, make contingencies for, because it was such a simple thing that he didn't even bother to incorporate it into his plan.
Yeah, and that'll be an aspect once we wrap up these dragon flights of other types of dragons in media. Remind me, I do want to get back to a point with that can make dragons terrifying.
So next up are the black dragons. Their role is not terribly well expressed, at least in World of Warcraft. It may have been gone into a bit more in Warcraft 1, 2, or 3.
Not so much in the older games, though. With the black dragons, you are going to find these kind of like Saruman. They're going to be at points of industry and building. They're going to be near forges. They're going to be near like alchemists or wizards' workshops. These tend to be almost, I don't want to say they're more bestial, like the whites, but they are definitely simpler. These are
They're
more.
simply they're certainly more violent.
They are definitely more
They're more
violent.
warlike.
Yeah, they're more about amassing their personal power base, but that seems to be the stretch of their motivation within Blizzard games is just their own power.
Right. And so the original aspect of the Black Dragons was Neltharion, who ended up being corrupted by the old gods and turned into Deathwing, who had an entire expansion devoted to him,
Yes,
which story-wise was a great expansion. Mechanically was not so great.
I agree
But
1000%.
but his role was the Earth Warder. So his realm was everything beneath the surface.
Right.
And so they have lots of fire involved and lots of earth involved in all of their magic. And they are inquisitive, they are scientific.
Very, yes.
That is one of the recurring things. Nefarian is one of the prominent black dragons in Warcraft lore, and he has an entire layer set up where it is just giant lab experiments.
Yes.
Where he's doing things like gene splicing and stuff like that. Stuff that is far beyond the technology of everybody else in Azeroth.
Yeah. And like I said, for this, I really got that Saruman field, experimenting with things like gunpowder or making the Urukai and forging new weapons and things like that. And again, tearing down the trees and blighting the land for more mechanical and industrial advantage.
Yeah, and the playable race that was introduced in the last expansion, in the Dragonflight expansion, was the Drakthir. And the Drakthir were created by Neltharion. They are humanoid dragonkin.
Yeah.
They were bred to be soldiers.
Yes. Again, this would be more of a D&D theme, but something like Pathfinder, something like that. If you were like, hey, who's the wizard that made like the owlbear or the beholder or something like that, some terrible monstrosity, probably a black dragon.
Well, if they didn't make it, they certainly brought it in from the Far Realms.
Yeah, absolutely.
They would have brought one in to experiment on it.
They just want to poke it a little bit, see how it reacts.
Exactly. So far, the reds are probably going to be clerics. The greens are going to be druids. The blues are going to be wizards. The blacks are going to be artificers. If we're staying on D&D classes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, black dragons are absolutely artificers.
I could totally hold with that.
I mean, they have elements of roguing there.
Absolutely.
They do have that cunning and subterfuge going on.
That is one thing we forgot to mention is the blacks are very, very sly.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, one of the major plot points of Vanilla WoW is that Onyxia, one of the black dragons, has infiltrated Stormwind.
Yeah, so she has taken human form and she has worked her way in through the ranks and the royalty and the nobility of the humans in this human city.
Well, I mean, she's established herself as basically the ward of the prince.
Yeah.
So, or the warden of the prince.
Yeah, the regent.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, she was half a step from taking it over.
Exactly. And just because King Varian was somewhere during that time, I don't remember exactly where he was. I'm sure that there are several books somewhere that I could read that would tell me exactly where Varian Wrynn was during that time.
Yeah. God, I want to say I remember. I think he was I want to say he went to a battle. I think he was captured or something like that. Yeah, it's been forever.
He may have been in Theramore.
Possibly, yeah.
It's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's been a while.
All I know is that there was dopey little Anduin, and was it Anduin Lothar, the guy who was actually in charge while Varian was away?
Yeah.
And so the last one were the Bronze Dragons, and the Bronze Dragons are the keepers of time. They are able to manipulate time. They protect the time ways. They're custodians of the timeline. They make sure that everything stays as it happened.
Yeah. If you're a fan of the Marvel series Loki from Disney Plus, the Bronze Dragons would absolutely be the TVA.
Mm-hmm.
Which actually, if you wanted to do a Marvel-themed game and throw a Bronze Dragon in just to blindside your players with, that would be perfect. And I mean, There are dragons within the Marvel comics, and none are coming to mind exactly, but I know they've encountered some at various points. And so, yeah, if you were doing a Marvel, which actually would be kind of fun too, doing a Marvel themed tabletop.
I mean,
Yeah, that'd be a ton of fun.
there is an official Marvel game from like the 80s.
Yeah, I was going to say it's an ancient one if it's still around, but that would actually be interesting to look back up. That would be a fun thing to play.
Yeah.
Okay. Things to research later.
Yeah, and so the Bronze Dragons did have a counterpart, which, if I remember correctly, the dragons in the Infinite Dragonflight originally started as Bronze Dragons.
Okay.
But they felt that because they could access the timelines, and because they had the power to manipulate within the timelines, that they had an obligation to stop certain catastrophic events from happening.
Responsibilities, I think.
And like there were several dungeons within Burning Crusade. There are a few more that happened in Wrath. And they did pop up again finally during Dragonflight. But there were dungeons where you would go in and the Bronze Dragons were sending you in because someone was messing with the timeline. And it ended up being the Infinite Dragonflight that were trying to stop certain catastrophic events from happening. One was trying to stop Arthas from becoming the Lich King,
right,
by killing him at the Scourge of Stratholme.
Okay.
There was one where they were trying to stop Medivh from opening the Dark Portal and letting the orcs into Azeroth.
Yeah, that was I love that dungeon. That's a great dungeon.
Yeah, Black Morass was fun.
Yeah.
There's one that requires a bit more understanding. This is probably one where I would have appreciated it more if I had played Warcraft 3.
Okay.
Old Hillsbrad.
Yeah.
Escape from Durnhold, where they're trying to stop Thrall from... I can't even remember exactly what they were trying to do in that particular...
They were trying to prevent Thrall from escaping. So if you've played Warcraft 3, like your first tutorial mission, you start with Thrall. And basically at the end of Warcraft 2, the humans have won. The orcs that survived that weren't killed were basically collected into internment camps. And they were used. So Thrall was basically a gladiator and a fighter so people could watch and hoot and holler for gladiatorial games, things like that. And he breaks out of this internment camp and kind of rallies the other orcs and kind of gets them together. And that starts the orc events for all of Warcraft 3. And he becomes the war chief for the orcs.
And ultimately the war chief for the entire horde.
Yes.
But yeah, so these are the sorts of things that, because if they're able to stop Arthas from becoming the Lich King, then in their mind, the events of the entire Wrath of the Lich King expansion don't happen.
Correct.
If they stop Medivh from opening the Dark Portal and letting the orcs into Azeroth, then the First War doesn't happen.
Yeah.
If they stop Thrall from escaping and organizing the orcs, then the Third War doesn't happen.
Right.
There's lots of these events that resulted in great loss of life that they were trying to keep from happening.
Yeah, it's like another series of games, but Command and Conquer Red Alert comes with the old trope that Albert Einstein invents a time machine so someone goes back and assassinates Hitler to stop, the Holocaust and all of World War II. And then that sets off a whole other timeline and chain of events that you have to unravel and deal with that. But that's kind of what the Infinite Dragonflight's trying to do without consideration of what happens afterwards.
And there is a quest that you do during the Dragonflight expansion where you are actually working with one of the Infinite Dragons, and the Bronze Dragon, Chromie, is trying to understand where this dragon is coming from, trying to understand her position. Yeah. And why she wants to, change the past. And so she goes back to this one very pivotal moment where this Infinite Dragon's sister is slain by a black dragon, I think it is.
Okay.
And going through all of the different potential changes, and every time, no matter what you do, her sister still ends up dying.
Oh, that sucks.
And ultimately, at the end, once you're able to actually, get what is considered a good ending sort of thing where you have eliminated all of the initial potential threats. The only thing that's there is this dragon that is entirely too powerful for you to fight. You find out
Ooh.
that she was willingly dying so that the other could escape.
Oh, wow.
It was a willing sacrifice the whole time.
Gotcha.
And so the point was, it doesn't matter. You can't actually change the timeline because the timeline will correct for itself.
Right. And I do love that idea and trope within stories and in sci-fi particularly. And as a DM, if you're trying to build, a time traveling story for your party, that might be a concept you want to keep in mind is, there is the butterfly effect, sure, but how much can you actually change?
So those are the 5 main dragon flights. We can get into some of the minutiae, but we've already been going for half an hour on this, and I think we want to actually touch on some other stuff.
Right.
We don't just want to make this a giant World of Warcraft lore dump.
I mean, that's often fun, but yeah. So tying back in with what we were talking about, Caligos, another type of dragon that you can see in media and that you could put into your game is the concept of this thing was one of those things that terrified me once I heard it and understanding it, but it's called cosmic indifference. And so you have these dragons, and again, they're these ancient, mighty, powerful things, and they are doing whatever they are doing. They're fighting amongst each other or they're building sandcastles, and they're doing it for their own sake. And humans, dwarves, whatever, us mere mortals are just beneath their notice. And so it'd be like walking across an anthill and crushing their entire, little town or village of ants because they're beneath your notice. And so you could have your world being shaped by dragons and the events of the dragons, but they don't even notice you. And so how would you work around them? Because if you know they're going to be at a certain thing, if they're doing something methodically, and this is going to happen. So like maybe they're going through and they're reshaping the world and creating mountains to fit their whim. And now you know that there is a major dwarven city in that mountain. Do you fight the dragon? Do you try to convince the dragon to stop somehow? Do you evacuate the city? What do you do with these huge world-shaping things that are going to do whatever, no matter what you try to stop?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting concept to play with.
Yeah.
Because it does bring in sort of a cosmic horror sort of vibe to everything. So yeah, that would be an excellent thing to play in like a Call of Cthulhu type setting. Yes. And I can see if we were doing this, if we were keeping this in more of a fantasy-oriented setting, or even if we had this in sort of a sci-fi-oriented setting, that there would end up being individuals who their whole job is studying the patterns of these dragons and trying to predict. Basically, they're meteorologists.
Yeah.
And they're trying to predict where the dragons are going to go and what they're going to do next and things of that nature. And they're just observing what they can of these colossal, potentially extra-dimensional entities and trying to puzzle out from the limited amount of data they can actually collect what the patterns are.
Yeah, the next draconic storm or whatever it's going to be. I like that. You could also take this into like something cyberpunk. And again, you could have this dragon be this amazingly complex AI, and it's shaping cyberspace to fit it because it's like a dragon and an egg, and it's getting ready to hatch at some point, but it's still adjusting itself in its nest. And so it's whatever your cyberspace is or however that connects, it changes it to fit its whim because it's trying to create a spot for itself.
And if you wanted to take it into a more physical aspect, functionally, there would be no difference between a dragon and, say, a nanite swarm.
Exactly. Ooh, nice. Yes.
The whole gray goop thing where, you're talking about this swarm of self-replicating nanobots that are basically rendering everything around them into a uniform gray goop.
I like that. I mean, and if you thought about that as like a dragon's breath weapon, as it created this gray goop, and that's how it eats things too.
Yeah.
Whatever biomass. Oh, I love that as a digital dragon. Oh, or
Right. Yeah.
cybernetic dragon. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And, this plays back into what we have said before, that a dragon functionally does not have to be a dragon literally.
Right.
So, this nanite swarm would constitute all of the requirements of what a dragon mechanically would provide for the game.
Yeah.
It is this giant entity that you cannot defeat with your limited personal resources.
Yeah.
You have to figure out how to avoid it and how to work around it because you are not going through it.
Yep. No, I love that. I really like that idea. The other dragon that really quickly comes to mind for me is different, but you have ones that are generally good and they're benevolent and they are a good thing to come across. And I'm thinking Falcor from Neverending Story. You've got the luck dragon.
Yeah.
And this can be like for your party, if your party's hitting like a really, really tough slog and they need that break, and then bam, there's big old fuzzy Great Pyrenees looking luck dragon.
Yep. Yeah, I should probably go back and try watching that again. I watched that once as a kid, and I bounced off of it so hard.
Yeah, it is not my favorite movie. I'm going to speak the sacrilege. Neverending Story, not my favorite movie. I do like Falcor. Just fast forward to like the last 5 minutes and you're set.
Yeah, that's about where I was too. I bounced off of it super hard.
That might have been an early ADD test.
Yeah, potentially. Quite potentially. Yeah, because I would have been probably 6 or 7, I think. I was probably a bit young to be watching it anyway.
Maybe, yeah.
I think
no,
my sister was watching it, and so I happened to be. And my sister is 6 years older than me, so.
Yeah. Other dragons I think that are really well done are the 2 remaining dragons from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think Avatar did dragons amazingly well.
Okay, yeah. It's been a while since I've watched, and I'm not remembering off the top of my head. I don't remember the dragons.
So with this, you have Iroh, who was known to have, quote, have killed the last dragon. So they were largely hunted into extinction. But people had rumored and talked of dragons. And it comes through, and they were keepers of knowledge. And so Aang and Zuko, go on this long journey, and they finally find them, and they're on a mountaintop. And they're not dead, and Iroh didn't kill them, but he learned from them, and this is why Iroh was such a strong firebender. And they teach both Aang and Zuko the fundamentals of firebending. So again, dragons in this case, they're more neutral, because people are generally, again, not up to their level of worry, unless they find particular instances that are noble or interesting enough for them to pay attention, in which case they gift them with knowledge and power, which again, I think is a great, not every dragon is a pinata to whack on. Sometimes they are givers of gifts and keepers of knowledge and guardians of gates. And keeping this idea with dragons too is, again, not everyone's meant to be smacked.
Right, yeah. And, going back, I'm pretty sure I said this once before, going back to the Dresden Files RPG, it runs off of the Fate system, and in the Fate system you have plot level entities.
Yeah.
So these are entities that you don't give them a stat block. They cannot be fought.
Yeah.
They are too powerful for the player characters to actually fight them.
Yes.
If the player characters pick a fight with them, you squish them like a bug.
Roll new character. You're dumb.
Yeah, exactly. And dragons in the Dresden Files fall into that plot level entity category.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because, dragons in the Dresden Files, the few of them that exist are far and beyond more powerful than the dragons that you see in D&D. These are entities that have so much control and so much access to magical power that they can literally unmake existence at their whim.
Yeah, I was going to say, without spoilers, in one book, someone's looking for a particular dragon and is like, no, he's Billy holding the threads of reality together right now. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's that's a thing.
Yeah. So there are a couple of other pieces of media that I did want to touch on.
Yeah.
One, this is the oldest account of a dragon that I know of, at least in Western literature. There may be something in Middle Eastern or Asian literature that predates this. There probably is. But Beowulf,
Yeah.
there is a dragon in Beowulf. You don't really hear about it much. It always talks about, the fight between Beowulf and Grendel, which is literally just the first third of this epic poem. Because it starts off with Beowulf versus Grendel, because Grendel is being a little shit and wrecking everybody's fun. And so Beowulf ends up going and killing Grendel. And then Grendel's mom shows up because she's upset that somebody killed her baby boy. And so Beowulf has to kill her.
Right.
But then the third part happens several years later, I believe. And Beowulf has to go and fight a dragon. And it taps into this Norse idea of dragons are what happen when you hoard wealth and you become a miser and you become stingy and you become avaricious. It's when you succumb to avarice.
Okay, I like that, as in like a divine retribution for poor choices is here's your dragon.
Yeah, and so it is literally a transmogrification. You, as a person, you end up transforming over time to represent your soul in your physical form, and you become brooding and scaly and ill-tempered and covetous.
He just became an old man.
More or less. And ultimately, it is the dragon that slays Beowulf. Beowulf slays the dragon in the process.
Yeah.
He slays the dragon and then succumbs to his wounds. But it is the dragon that ultimately kills Beowulf at the end of the epic poem.
Yeah, that has very much the same feel as Arthur and Mordred.
Yes. I wonder where they got the idea from.
Who knows? No, and again, I like that idea too, as, even if you did something like the painting of Dorian Gray, where, he's got the painting and the painting becomes a dragon over time, or you just have this person, and like I said, this dragon becomes like divine penance for whatever poor choices they've made in life, and now they have to find some way to deal with it. And so they draft in your party or your players to help them with it. And maybe they learn a lesson, maybe they don't. Maybe your players just get a ton of XP, but it would be a good story hook for RP.
I think if you were going this route, this dragon would be the embodiment of the meme. Some people exist only to serve as a lesson for others.
Yes, I love it.
Like, this is the cautionary tale. This is why you don't do that.
Don't be that guy.
Yeah, don't be that guy. And one last one that I really wanted to touch on. This is from a series of books that I read in high school. I need to go back and read them again, but I'm afraid to, because I'm afraid that they're not as good as I remember them being.
Oh, that's always terrible when you do that.
Because I was 16 when I read them, and my bar for what makes a good book at 16 was substantially lower than my bar for what makes a good book now.
Fair.
And I'm afraid that it's going to end up being entirely too tropey for me to truly enjoy again. But the books are the Dragon Crown War Cycle by Michael Stackpole.
I've not read those.
I really enjoyed them when I read them. The caveat is it was more than half my life ago.
Fair. That's like, I read The Incarnations of Immortality by Piers Anthony, and I enjoyed the heck out of them in high school. And then I went back probably 4 or 5 years ago and tried to read them again as an adult, and they did not age well. They were written in the heyday of the 80s with all of the misogyny and everything else written right into it. I'm like, oh, he actually wrote that? He put that on paper? It was bad.
Yeah. These books were written in the mid to late 90s, I believe.
Okay.
So we're in that transition from fantasy as pulp entertainment to fantasy as slightly more refined literature.
Okay.
But I can guarantee you we hadn't made that transition yet.
Fair.
It was still fairly pulpy.
Okay.
I can guarantee that. I mean, and it, you know, and it has elves and all of that. But I remember that the elves were different enough from the other stuff that I had read before that they were very interesting.
Okay. But how
Um,
about the dragons? What did the dragons do?
but so the dragons, there aren't very many dragons in this book, but they are very, as would be befitting of sort of anything called the dragon, they are very magically powerful entities, and they tend to roam around in a humanoid form, just basically as camouflage, you
Okay.
know, to keep other people from trying to hunt them down. But the big element that you run into with these dragons is that, well, the plot point of them is that each dragon has a heart stone, which is this gem heart basically within them, that contains their soul and
Oh, nice.
therefore contains their magical power. And so if you are able to destroy their heartstone, you kill the dragon.
Okay. That sounds very similar to the 90s movie Dragonheart with Sean Connery.
Yes, I did have Dragonheart on my list of things, and it's not quite, you know, unique enough
Fair.
to bring it in. One of the things that I do like about Dragonheart, though, is when you get towards the end and the king's mother brings in the dragon hunters
Right.
and the outlandish armor that they're wearing,
Yeah.
because the armor doesn't have to be functional for fighting against a person.
Right. Yeah.
You look at it and I don't know as if the costume department had any inclination of this level of storytelling whenever they decided to design these very fanciful, you know, spiky, scaly armors. But what it does, because the armor that they're wearing might have some small amount of protection against the natural weapons of a dragon, particularly the breath
Okay.
weapon, because it is made of dragon scales. But by and large, if you get hit, if you get breathed on by a dragon, if you get chomped, you're dead.
Yeah.
There's no armor that's going to save you from that.
That's
So,
deep.
so what it does is it functions as sort of a resume almost. You are demonstrating that you have killed dragons before. Look at what I am wearing. Everything that I am wearing, all of my armor is crafted from the bits and pieces of the dragons I have slain. You can look at me and you can see that I am an experienced dragon hunter.
Yes.
And it, you know, it gives that vibe, it lends that credence, it lends that authority that they would need in this particular industry.
Yeah, no, I like that aspect of it. And that works great until, the dragon recognizes a piece of something from an acquaintance and gets enraged, and now you're targeted.
Well, that would also play into what they were trying to do, because you're trying to bait the dragon into certain situations to where you can actually hunt them.
Right. No, yeah, no, I don't recall the armor too much, but that would make perfect sense.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I remember pretty distinctly is just the crazy armor with the big, like, tooth or claw spikes on the pauldrons and the, you know, big spikes around the helmet and all of that stuff.
Right.
And it's all clearly designed to be representative of they are wearing dragon scales and dragon claws and dragon teeth.
Gotcha. And I think one more thing I want to hop in here with is probably my least favorite kind of dragon. And this is like the Game of Thrones type dragon, or, I've read a lot of fantasy, I've read a lot of sci-fi, and where the dragon is basically just a large, strong, and intelligent beast, whether it be a mount animal or a war beast or a beast of burden. I read one series, I forget the name of the series, but they had dragon riders, and
You're talking about Dragon Riders of Pern?
no, not Dragon Riders of Pern. That was a hard
Okay.
series to read.
Yeah,
Um,
and McCaffrey?
Yeah, no, this was basically dragons took the place of aviation during World War One. So you
Mm.
had like the first, person was riding a dragon and they were using it to scout enemy lines, and then they were using them as transport, and then they were using them to fight dragons air to air, like air to air combat, and they were using them to transport mages to basically drop fireballs on people like that. And that was an interesting take on dragons, but at that point the dragons were still just smarter than average beasts. Game of Thrones, I mean, stunningly amazing, but the dragons, I mean, yeah, it's probably smarter than a dog or a horse, but that was about it. Yeah, they could breathe fire, they took commands, but they were just beasts. And you could put these in your game if you want these there, whether they be, like I said, a wild creature that your party comes against, or again, maybe you have a dragon keeper that your party's coming up against to fight, and so he has a kennel or a coterie or whatever of dragons to unleash to fight against. And at this point, those dragons are just basically pinatas for XP. But they do have their role, and they can be a difficult fight.
And if you wanted to have a linguistic differentiation and have both types,
Oh,
I think what you're looking for are drakes.
yes.
Because drakes and dragons are similar but not the same.
Yeah.
And sort of
like
in
that.
the same way that gorillas and orangutans are similar but not the same.
No, I like that.
And so your drakes would be the more animalistic version, and potentially these are being kept as pets or as companion animals by dragons.
Okay, I can see that.
And it might be a thing where if a dragon lays a clutch of eggs and they hatch out all of the eggs, only one or two of them might be true dragons and the rest of them are drakes.
That
And
would be interesting.
and it's not a nurture thing. They still love all of their children. These are all their children. It's just that some of them are sapient and some of them aren't.
Okay, I like that. I could also see again like a dragon going and keeping a bunch of drakes to guard their horde, or even like a nest clutch while they're out doing whatever, and so they've got a swarm of drakes just there kind of to hold down the fort.
Yeah. And you could potentially also go into this, drawing from sort of a Vampire the Masquerade sort of vibe, where in Vampire you can have somebody who you feed off of, who you as a vampire have fed your blood to and turned them into a ghoul.
Okay.
And so these drakes are potentially, whenever a dragon hatches their clutch, they all hatch as drakes.
Okay.
And then as they get older, once they have demonstrated that they have the ability to survive on their own, then they go through some sort of ritual which basically awakens them, like the awakening spell.
Ooh, I like that.
And then they become a dragon.
Okay, I like that. I'm also kind of thinking like the xenomorphs where you go from drone to Praetorian to Queen, depending on what the situation is, but everyone starts at that base level, and it's just if there's a gap, then you have whatever hormonal or biological change that shifts. And so that would shift a drake into a dragon.
Yeah, and I mean it could be something as biological as puberty.
Yeah.
They could be drakes until they hit the point where they do whatever it is that triggers that hormone click. And when the hormones click and start pumping, various chemicals into their brains, it awakens their conscious thought. And then they make that gradual shift from drake to dragon.
Well, I'm saying, the human brain's not fully formed until like 24, 25.
True.
So that would make perfect sense, especially if you have something as sapient and as wise as a dragon.
And making it biological like that gets away from some of the potential squick that you can run into with dragons deciding which of the drakes they are going to awaken.
Yes.
It moves away from some of the problematic bodily autonomy questions.
Okay. I think another good way to do this would be, again, drawing back. And if we did something like our blue dragon flag, where there are keepers of ley lines, there has to be a certain amount of magical presence, or perhaps a lack of magical presence, for that change to occur. And so you have to either take them to or from one of those nexus points. And if you've got someone that's either a blue dragon that's trying to control it for some reason, or somehow they've disrupted these blue dragons so they cannot properly manage those nexus points. So dragons are not properly maturing. So maybe a dragon in some form or another approaches the party to correct this one way or the other so they can reestablish their life cycle.
Yeah, and it could be something drawing from the Fallout games and the ghouls in the Fallout games, where you become a ghoul from being exposed to huge amounts of radiation.
Yeah.
There may be some sort of magical or elemental,
Threshold?
environmental thing that you have to have a certain amount of exposure to in order to trigger that metamorphosis.
Oh, I like that. I like that too. Yeah. All right. I'm tapped out.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, we've been going for about an hour, so I think we did good. For an impromptu episode, I think we did pretty good.
Yeah, no, and again, I love exploring dragon lore and lore in general, and I really like trying to take tropes and stories that I love and figuring out how to put them into a game. Because, I mean, these are popular and well-known stories for a reason. If you can sink those into a game and get your players to really bite into it, you can do a lot with them.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in a previous episode, I've been working my way through The Cinder Spires by Jim Butcher. And there are dragons in these books. They have not actually made an appearance yet.
Okay.
However, they are referenced heavily in the second book because there is a character that has a dragon plume cloak.
Ooh.
And the context clues that I'm picking up, it vibes like almost peacock feathers.
Okay, nice.
They have this sort of iridescent sheen to them.
Okay.
And they're capable of like deflecting energy weapons and such. And this particular character has made a name for herself because she has hunted dragons on her airship.
Okay.
And so this cloak that she wears is made with plumes from a dragon that she killed.
Nice.
And that is her big status symbol, the thing where she can say, this is what you're dealing with. So yeah, and I still need to get into the third book, and hopefully, my fingers are crossed that a dragon makes an appearance in the third book, because I want to see what the hell this thing is. But anyway, I think that is going to do it for tonight. If you have any comments, suggestions, or ideas, send us an email, undercommontaste@gmail.com, or send us a direct message through our Discord. You can find a link to the Discord, as well as all of our other social medias, through our website, undercommontaste.com. You can also find links there to our itch page, undercommontaste.itch.io, and our Patreon, patreon.com/undercommontaste.
Again, if this is your first time listening, we're so happy you found us. You can find our other podcasts on your podcatcher of choice. Just search Undercommon Taste. You can also join me on Tuesdays and Thursdays at twitch.tv/undercommontaste. On Tuesdays, I play through, right now currently, Darkest Dungeon, and on Thursday, I am playing the RPG classic Neverwinter Nights.
Stay safe, everyone, and we will see you again in 2 weeks with our interview with C.R. Rowenson. We promise.
Happy gaming.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Undercommon Taste. Our theme song is Massacre Anne, written and performed by Mary Kroll and used with permission. You can find Mary online at marykroll.bandcamp.com or on Patreon at patreon.com/Dr. Mary C. Kroll. Our logo is by David Sutherland. You can find more of David's work on deviantart.com/David Sutherland or on instagram.com/Willex_73. We'll be back in 2 weeks, so stay safe, and we'll see you then.